friends. How are you doing today? It's great to see you, and welcome to the 44th episode of In the Know, your 25-minute deep dive into the modern employee experience and what we can do to make it better. I'm JD from Exonify, and today's episode is all about bullies. I don't like bullies, but who does, right? I mean, bullies make you feel like they make you feel bad about yourself. They make you feel isolated. They make you feel like you just can't do anything right, no matter how hard you try. And it's incredibly unfortunate that so many people had to deal with bullies growing up, including myself. But that's not where the story really ends. You see, sometimes the bullies from the schoolyard, well, they share a lot of the same traits as some of the people that we run into in the workplace as adults. They intimidate, they exploit, they create environments that erode trust, damage relationships, and undermine the well-being of employees. But at work, we don't usually call them bullies. We call them toxic leaders. And they're a very unfortunate, but a very real problem for far too many organizations. So how do you overcome a toxic leader? What can your company do to make sure employees feel safe, respected, and supported every single day? Well, we're going to ask someone who helps non-HR people understand how HR and business leaders can work together to foster sustained success. Loren Sanders is here to help us confront toxic leadership and help us learn more about her book, Empathy is Not a Weakness. Plus, a few of our live LinkedIn viewers, well, you're going to have a chance to grab a copy of Loren's book later on in the show. So make sure to do that. Here's a copy right here. But before we welcome Loren, it's time for a special ITK news break. Got great theme music here on the show. But here are the latest headlines from the world of L&D and beyond. And it begins with, the results are in. The biggest story in the world is AI. Did you know? It's the biggest story in L&D as well, and that's according to Donald Taylor, who dropped the 2024 results of his annual Global Sentiment Survey just this past week. The survey asks L&D pros from around the world what's going to be hot in the field this year. And not only is AI at the top of the list, but it garnered an unprecedented 21.5% of the voting share. And then it's followed by topics like skills-based strategies, personalization, analytics, all of which have huge AI implications. So if you want to get a full copy of the report, all you got to do is go over to Don's website. That's donaldhtaylor.co.uk. And you can check out the full report for yourself. And if you want to see just how fast AI is evolving, look no further than OpenAI's latest announcement, Sora. Sora is an AI model that creates video from text instructions. And for context, I want to show you something. So here's an example of an AI-generated video that I shared at a conference less than a year ago. And yes, that's Will Smith eating spaghetti. Here's a video generated by Sora that was announced last week. And as you can tell, things have changed a little bit. We're progressing quite quickly. We still have a long way to go, but it's needless to say that digital creation is quickly transforming before our eyes. And I have actually applied some of that AI magic during a webinar that I delivered in partnership with Training Magazine Network last week. And I just wanted to say thanks to the 800 plus learning and development pros that signed up to learn everything we can learn from Wile E. Coyote and share in the story of the modern learning ecosystem. And I'm going to be sharing that story again next week at the Training 2024 conference that kicks off at the Walt Disney World Resort. So if you're going to be in Orlando next week, be sure to stop by and say hello. But I know not everyone can make it to Orlando next week. The weather's going to be really nice too. But if you can't make it next week, don't worry, because you can hang out with me again online tomorrow when I'm going to join Aaron Champion from Beyond to showcase how we're working together to help organizations maximize the value of their off-the-shelf content. Because you know how OTS content usually is just kind of meh? You know, it doesn't match your brand or your processes or even maybe the specific language needs of your team members. Well, Exonify is working with Beyond and their AI-powered authoring tools to solve this problem with our brand new Exonify Content Studio. So you can learn more about this unique partnership between Exonify and Beyond tomorrow as we present leveraging AI to maximize the value of off-the-shelf content at 3 p.m. during the Training Industry's Leader Talks. So get all the details and register at trainingindustry.com. And if on-demand video is more your thing, you should head over to the Exonify YouTube channel right after this, because you're watching on LinkedIn now, then go over to YouTube and check out our latest video from Exonicom 2023. because we just dropped our main stage session, Supporting the Whole Human, which featured Russell Wigington, president of the National Civil Rights Museum, alongside Mark Person from Dollar General, and friend of the show, Elizabeth Thompson from Intuitive Quest. Russell, Mark, and Elizabeth had a frank and practical conversation with our Exonicom audience about what it takes to foster a culture of belonging within their companies. So be sure to check out the full 45-minute session at youtube.com/Exonify. And, you're online. So while you're there, head over to exonify.com because you can grab our latest research report in partnership with Forrester. So Forrester released a learning tech research report that takes a detailed look at 22 learning management and experience platforms and offers guidance that will help you find the right technology to support your team. So get a complimentary copy of Forrester's report by heading over to exonify.com. Big banner at the top of the website. Can't miss it. And finally, I have one more exciting announcement, and it's for all Exonify customers out there, because how would you like to hang out with me? I look like that guy in New Orleans this May, because we're giving away an almost all expenses paid trip to the ATD 24 conference to one lucky member of the Exonify community. We're taking care of the flight, we're taking care of the hotel, taking care of the full conference registration. Plus, if this is your first time attending the biggest L&D show in the world, I'm going to help you through the planning process. And to win, all you have to do is refer another organization that you think could benefit from Exonify. And the more referrals that you submit, the more chances you have to win. The contest runs through March 14th, so reach out to your customer success manager for more details, and I hope to see you in New Orleans this May. And that has been your ITK News Break for Wednesday, February 21st, 2024. And now let's welcome our special ITK guest, Loren Sanders. Loren Sanders is an author, speaker, empathy coach, and fractional L&D strategist who strives to leverage people's passion and talent and connect their professional development to business results. Loren also teaches organizational communications, effective leadership, and strategic talent management as an adjunct faculty member at Lake Forest Graduate School of Management. Her book, Empathy is Not a Weakness and Other Stories from the Edge, is a guide for enhancing your leadership skills and transforming your company's culture, whether you're a seasoned leader or new to your management role. Loren Sanders, you're in the know. How's it going?
Good. If I had been planning ahead and knew that you were going to show Will Smith eating spaghetti, I would have had a plate here and been mowing on spaghetti just to start us off.
I said this to someone yesterday, actually, that the ultimate power move in a meeting, especially a virtual meeting, it would be obnoxious in real life and a physical meeting. But if you're in a virtual meeting, just eating spaghetti, that is the ultimate power move, in my opinion. But I digress. Let's dive into the topic for today. I want to get your perspective on what's the difference between a crappy manager and a toxic leader. What are some of the attributes that you'd use to define toxic leadership?
Let me start by saying that sometimes toxic leadership and bad management overlap in practice, but they originate from two completely different sets of behaviors, and the impacts are vastly different. A crappy manager might be a terrible communicator, might be a bad delegator, might have a lack of organizational skills, might be completely unhelpful, but sometimes it can be a super fun manager that's completely ineffective. But their challenges typically come from lack of competence or lack of experience and not from malice. On the other hand, the toxic leader has behaviors that are intentionally harmful, manipulative, self-serving. They thrive on creating environments of fear and intimidation and instability and have do you remember back in the 90s, and I'm telling you how old I am now, when we talked about kiss up, kick down leadership styles, where they kiss up to the people above them and kick everything down to the people who report?
I wasn't there for it, but I'm picking up what you're putting down.
All right. Yeah, that kiss up, kick down leadership style, but paired with an inflated sense of self-worth. And these leaders typically target talented and highly ethical employees because their fear is being exposed as a fraud. They're ego-driven, insecure. They're willing to compromise people and organizations in order to maintain their power status. They undermine trust. They blame. They don't take responsibility. They don't take accountability. And they show zero concern. And I want to be clear about this from an action perspective for the well-being of their team members. So they'll probably say the right things and then not do the right things. And some key signs for you: abusive behavior, manipulation, gaslighting, and that could be a whole podcast by itself, exploiting people for their own personal gain, and a genuine lack of listening or collaboration. And where I really like to tie this together is there's research from the National Institute of Health that actually categorizes the patterns of toxic leadership into 4 basic buckets, which are egotism, ethical failures, incompetence, and neuroticism. And they also note that organizational cultures might inadvertently excuse this behavior. And what was even more interesting is a lot of the research shows the perception of toxicity can be influenced by social constructs, but also by gender. And women are more likely to view the leaders as toxic. Men are more inclined to collude. So I just want you to digest that for a moment.
I'm willing to bet that everyone watching or listening right now, hopefully at least, says the attributes you just highlighted and that kind of differentiation between bad management and toxic leadership, those are bad things and we don't want those things. The question becomes kind of beyond the baseline kind of altruistic idea that, yeah, of course employees should feel respected at work. That just makes sense to me. Why should organizations pay explicit attention to this idea of toxic leadership? So how do we get people's attention by helping them understand how this notion is impacting their ability to achieve their goals and run their organizations?
It goes beyond just the behavior. The impact of a toxic leader is beyond the basic expectation of maintaining respectful and caring work environments. The impacts can be profound and wide ranging, affecting everything from employee well being and mental health to the bottom line. And when trust and safety are lacking, how are people supposed to innovate or collaborate? Not to mention, if there's an unspoken rule where toxic leadership is just accepted and promoted, you wind up with a culture of fear and people who are more concerned with avoiding negative repercussions than sharing ideas. And long term, that's going to impact your recruiting, it's going to impact your retention, not to mention legal and compliance risks, your brand image, your reputation. And even if it's only in pockets, it can still undermine the strategic alignment of an entire organization. But I cannot stress this one thing enough. It's your heart attack. It is not theirs.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think the reality of the situation, especially in a large distributed organization, is that no one is in every room, right? No one's in every conversation. And it can be, hopefully, easy to spot a crappy manager because kind of all you have to do is look at the numbers, right? And the KPIs and say, well, you're not hitting your goals. Something is wrong. And we need to have a conversation to figure out what that is. So how do you spot a toxic leader, especially if maybe they are good at hitting their accountability, they're good at hitting the results? How does an organization figure out that they have this problem before the dominoes start falling and it starts impacting the spreadsheet and the bottom line?
You know how leaders talk about zooming in and zooming out, taking the strategic view, taking the granular view? Identifying toxic leadership really requires a more holistic approach. So you have to look at both the behavior of the leaders, but also the broader organizational context, which often gets missed. And being an L&D person, I'm a big fan of rubrics and observable metrics. So the first thing would be leadership behavior by observation, one leading indicator. So is there micromanagement? Is there excessive control with little room for autonomy or creativity or innovation? Is there only one right way? Does the team never seem to get to the point of what they're doing because the leader had some other idea in the shower and now all of the work that's been done so far is trashed? Are people publicly criticized or humiliated? Again, back to the concern for people's well-being, lack of empathy, manipulative communications that are used to influence things or shift blame, or the leader that says, yes, my team's going to do all of that, but I personally am not doing any of it. I'm just going to shift it all down. That's one piece. If you've been to anything I've talked to, I always talk about return on environment. Environment plays a huge part. So what does the environment look like? Are you listening to the employee feedback, formal and informal? Words that are used to describe the leadership team matter. A lot of people use those euphemisms because they're trying to tread lightly about what's really happening. Turnover, who's leaving? Are you losing your best people? Do you have presenteeism? Are people just kind of there? If you don't know what that is, or high absenteeism for jobs that track that decreased performance, but there's also a lot of organizational health indicators. And please, for the love of all things, everything, don't give me the engagement survey because it doesn't do what it's intended to do. And that's a whole other podcast too. Beyond engagement, let's talk about values and behaviors that are promoted on teams. Let's talk about performance metrics and analysis of changes. If you look at the way organizations change their key performance indicators over time, you might be able to assess whether leadership practices or KPIs are undermining the team effectiveness. Look at your grievance reporting. The frequency and the nature of that can tell you a lot. And then development programming and coaching. What opportunities exist for coaching, mentoring, development? What is the basis and the content of the leadership development programming? If you're looking at one size fits all, because we know how companies live out of the box things, are they all aimed at looking at healthy practices? This really isn't a one size fits all situation.
So I would say if I had to pick a theme to my week so far, it has been the challenge of the engagement survey and the limitations of that data as a proxy for meaningful measurement of employee experience. Because I made a point in a session that I did yesterday, which was as an operational manager, I was always measured based on business related KPIs and never based on employee experience metrics. And where do people lean and where do
Am I
people
allowed to do
find
this?
their motivation? You can feel free.
Okay.
And those are important things, but at no point did I think anyone judge my ability as a manager based on my ability to retain staff, to engage staff, to create development opportunities for and kind of career mobility for people. How many people got promoted from my team versus other teams? These types of things. So the two things I picked up so far is we have to take a hard look at the metrics that we're using to measure people's performance on the job as related to leadership and management, and make sure they're reflective of the experience of the employee team, as well as the environment that might make it okay for some of these things or give people permission or at least cover to behave in certain ways that create this toxic leadership gap. But the one thing I want to make sure we touch on is, all right, if we're doing these things, we've got, we're looking at meaningful metrics, we're really assessing the environment, who fixes the problem? So if you figure out that you have a toxic leadership issue or there's certain individuals that are reflecting in that way, who steps in, especially if we're talking about senior management potentially being a problem?
Well, addressing toxic leadership, especially at the senior level, is still a collective responsibility. It involves multiple layers of organizations. And of course, the common answer is going to be, well, it's the board of directors and then likely HR policy implementation that prevent toxic behavior and provide channels for employees to report issues confidentiality. But that doesn't happen, right? We need to look at investigations, the allegations of toxic leadership, and work with senior management to address and resolve those. But the reality is that toxic behavior that is tolerated becomes normalized. And I want to share some staggering data from the Workplace Bullying Institute and SHRM that highlights the prevalence of bullying and toxic leadership in the workplace. And I want to emphasize the importance of a collective effort being necessary to combat this. A significant portion of bullying is top down. We know this, right? Did you know that there's a higher incidence of bullying towards remote employees? That there's a lack of federal laws that specifically target workplace bullying, and that 31 states have enacted laws about bullying to prevent this from happening. But a lot of research suggests that groups often mistakenly equate overconfidence with leadership ability. And that leads to the promotion of poorly suited people to leadership positions. And one really interesting project that was done out of Ohio State University had groups that consistently elected the overconfident, incompetent person to lead a team. And what that means for you is that there's an increased likelihood that you're going to have to work for a toxic leader at some point in your career. Internationally, 1 in 5 employees say they've been bullied at work. In the US, 48.6 Americans say they've been exposed to bullying, 30% directly impacted, 19% witnessing it. But what was even more staggering to me was that Gen Z, who you think would be most likely to speak up, was the least likely to report it, and Gen X was the most likely. So my question back to you, JD, is whose responsibility is it to deal with it? or who's most likely to deal with it? Because what we really need is transparent reporting in confidential and secure ways where colleagues actually trust without the fear of retaliation, and including clear definitions and consequences along with better development programming. But that takes culture change.
And the thing that's been echoing in my head throughout this conversation has been the importance of people leveraging their own influence and power to step in. I think there's direct correlations between this conversation and other types of toxic behavior just from a social perspective. But thinking about the fact that maybe you're not the manager in the room and maybe you're not leading this particular project. But if you're around when you see people behaving a certain way and assessing your ability to influence the situation, because maybe you're not a manager, but you're a very tenured person. You're a person who has people's ear. You're a person who has a level of respect with your peer group where maybe it's not directly impacting you, but it is your problem because you have the ability to elevate a conversation and to raise your hand in a certain way, in addition to needing, because you can't necessarily act alone if you don't have an environment that's supportive of that. And I think it's an unfortunate default to say this is an HR problem, where we definitely need the HR mechanisms in place and the policies in place and the outcomes in place. But it is one of those situations where it is a universal effort, a unified effort required to agree on what we will stand for, what we will not stand for in an organization. And then for the people who have not necessarily the authority, but the power to stand up and support and defend and take care of others, even if it's not in your job description to necessarily do that. But that's where I want to kind of start to wrap our conversation up is if you're an individual employee, so we're talking kind of institutional decision-making a lot. We need to put systems in place and measurement in place. Let's just talk about one person. And maybe this conversation is way too familiar to someone out there right now. And you're starting to figure out that you have a toxic leadership situation. What can an individual employee do to deal with this situation if they're maybe not working in an environment that gives them the mechanisms they need?
I think the first thing is to document everything, because you never know where things will land or if you'll be called upon to answer questions about it. So document the dates, the times, what was said, what was done, who witnessed it, in case you need to support something later. Know what the policies and procedures are, but more importantly, find yourself a mentor or a coach who can help you. If you can find somebody who actually understands your organizational dynamics, even better. Your coach can help you work through things. They don't give you answers, but they help you work through your own thinking about things. Your mentor can actually give you answers and offer advice or support. And sometimes a great mentor with a little bit higher level can help you advocate for yourself. Build your support network, but don't build it for drama. Exchanging memes during a terrible team meeting, that can be fun, but it can also lead to conversations that end up just being dramatic. Choose your network so that you can share collective insights and solutions. Don't choose it for drama. Take care of yourself. Hobbies, workout, music, whatever you do, create AI movies like JD, that was for you. Set clear boundaries. Limit the time that you spend with the person. There's a concept called gray rock, which is be about as interesting as a gray rock, so you get overlooked. Pattern interrupt your own thinking so that you can respond instead of reacting. If you're being screamed at, rather than push back in, say, well, you might be right. And then you can kind of redirect the conversation. Develop yourself. Plan your exit. And above everything else, check yourself for toxic traits, because sometimes it's us. Sometimes it's not always the leader. So check yourself and understand what that means.
Yeah, that's a great point to start to wrap up on, especially the importance of facilitating this conversation, asking these questions and bringing this up and not waiting for there to be a problem and to identify that there's a toxic leadership situation happening. How are we starting to assess the workplace? Ask the questions if we have the right support mechanisms in place, the right measurements in place, so that when that inevitable situation arises, we're ready to, and people feel empowered to deal with it, and not hopefully that they have to plan an exit. But if that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do, and you should feel empowered to do that. So Loren, thank you so much for your practical and straightforward insights into the Toxic Leadership Challenge. But before we let you go, I want to share a bit about your book, Empathy is Not a Weakness. But rather than just talk about the book, I'd like to invite you to play ITK's favorite game, and everyone out there can play along with us. That's right. It's time for yours, mine, or Carl's.
I'm a little scared and intimidated.
The rules of the game are simple. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read a brief passage from a book. Loren, it's then up to you to tell me which book did that passage come from. Is it from your book, Empathy is Not a Weakness? Is it from my book, The Modern Learning Ecosystem? Or is it from Carl Kopp's book, Microlearning, Short and Sweet? Because we put Carl Kopp in everything on In the Know. So if you're watching live on LinkedIn right now, you can also play along. Just type, who do you think the author of each passage is, into the LinkedIn chat. Just write Loren, JD, or Carl. And after we wrap up today's episode, we'll pick a couple lucky commenters to receive a copy of Loren's book. So Loren, are you ready to play? Yours, mine, or Carl's?
I am ready to play. Okay.
Here is our first passage. One method frequently used by advertising agencies that can be easily copied by training and development is the use of a celebrity endorsement. Who wrote that? Was it you? Was it me? Or was it Carl Kopp?
Ooh. I'm going to say it was you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
I'm sorry.
It was either you or Carl. I wasn't sure.
Carl Kopp. It's really a test of, do you remember your own book? Because if I played this game, I would fail this game. But let's move on to the second passage. We're going to get this one. We're going to get this one.
Okay.
Here's the passage. At least once a day, tell someone you appreciate them. This improves our mood, refreshes us, and makes us better human beings. Who wrote it? Was it you, me, or Carl Kopp?
That would be me.
That is correct. That is from your book, Empathy is Not a Weakness. Curious, what brought you to write this book at this time?
The book is a reflection of my journey to be a better leader. There was a time where I was an awful leader. I might even say I was a toxic leader. I had a great leader who helped me recognize it and change what I was doing. And I took notes along the way, talked to a lot of people. You hear a lot of their stories in the book. And it's really, I noticed a lot of people were writing that empathy was important, but no one was telling anyone how to get it. Mm-hmm. No one was telling anybody what they needed to do to be better at it. And I will argue all day long that empathy is a practice, not a skill. And if you are not practicing it, you are getting worse.
Great point. And again, if you want a copy of Loren's book or a chance to get one, drop a comment in the LinkedIn chat right now, playing along with us as we head to the third passage. The passage is, we do our best work when no one has to call for help. People may not know we're involved, but we're always there in the background, making sure Bruce Wayne has the tools he needs to be the best Cape Crusader he can be. Who wrote it? You, me, or Carl Kopp?
That would be JD Dillon.
That is definitely me. Most Batman references per page of any learning and development book by far. Heading to our fourth passage. This is a challenging one. The spacing effect, or spaced retrieval, is an instructional concept that involves providing learners with content spaced over time and has been shown to be an effective tool for aiding retention. Who wrote it? You, me, or Carl?
It could be you or Carl. So I'm going to go with Carl.
That is correct. Carl Kopp. Microlearning, Short and Sweet. Just to let everyone out there know, I originally had picked a passage from Carl's book in which Carl quoted me. And I thought that was a bit of a trick question because who wrote it really? Was it the author of the book or the person who sent him the quote? Final passage for today. Here it is. Last part of our game. Again, answers in the LinkedIn chat if you want a chance to get Loren's book. You will be a better leader for having read it. And I have no doubt that you will be thinking of the people you want to share it with as soon as you get to the last page. I know I did. Who wrote it? You, me, or Carl?
Ooh. You.
Actually, it's from your book, but it's from the foreword written by Valerie Alexander.
I had a feeling it was, and I was like, oh, I don't remember every word she wrote.
Slight trick, but that's all the time we have for yours, mine, or Carl's. Loren, thank you so much for joining us today on ITK. How can people connect with you, follow the awesome work you're doing, and grab a copy of Empathy is Not a Weakness?
They can follow me on LinkedIn or reach out to me through LinkedIn. They can also go to loren365.com, or they can order the book anywhere they order books. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books, A Million, Bookshop.org.
Awesome. Thank you again so much to Loren Sanders for helping us dive into the very real challenge of toxic leadership. And if you're watching live on LinkedIn, be sure to keep an eye on those DMs because you may be walking away with a copy of Loren's book. And if you had a good time today, be sure to subscribe to ITK. Head over to exonify.com/ITK to sign up for show announcements and reminders. You can also binge watch the entire ITK collection at the Exonify YouTube channel or listen to In the Know on your favorite podcast app. And be sure to come back in 2 weeks for a virtual trip across the pond because we're going to be joined by Michael Esau, Global HR Advisor with SAP. And Michael and I are going to explore the concept of loyalty in today's workplace and why it's time for companies to shift their focus away from loyalty and towards advocacy. So be sure to throw a hold on your calendar for Wednesday, March 6th at 11:30 a.m. Eastern to get a new perspective on employee engagement with Michael Esau. Until then, I've been JD. Now you're in the know, and always remember to ask yourself the important questions. Like, why was the Scarecrow a great choice for team leader? Because he was outstanding in his field. I'll see you next time. In the Know is produced by Risha McCutcheon. Visual design by Mark Anderson. Additional production support by Andrea Miller, Malia Bernard, Tung La, and Megan Kay. The show is written and hosted by me, JD Dillon. Exonify, ITK is an Exonify production. For more information on how Exonify helps frontline workers learn, connect, and get things done, visit exonify.com.